Well, hello. We're going to start chapter 7 today in Acts. This is Stephen and his defense. Do you remember yesterday they brought him up before the council, and all that sat in the council looking steadfastly on him, saw his face as it had been the face of an angel. So we're going to hear Stephen today. Chapter 7 begins, "Then said the high priest, 'Are these things so?'" He's asking Stephen, did he speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God? Did he speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law? Did he do it? So here's what Stephen's answer was. And he said, "Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan." Now listen, he called them men, he called them brethren, and he called them fathers. And he said, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham. He was a Jew, and they were Jews. I don't know why that's making me cry, but I just feel like it's hard when there's contention and where there's not any way to agree with somebody that you love. So Stephen did love. He loved with Jesus, the Christ love, the love of Christ, right? And he told them about Abraham, our father Abraham, and said unto him, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee." So he begins to tell the history of the Jews. They all knew, but he wanted to use it as his defense. "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Charan. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land, wherein ye now dwell." He removed him. Who removed whom? Whom? God removed him. God brought him to that land. He was 75 years old. He was my age. You think God's going to take me and start me a brand new life? I don't know. Anyhow, it is kind of a new life for me, actually. "And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said God, and after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place." There's that "said God" that I was talking about the other day that made me cry. The Word of God is full of emotion. I don't know about men when they read it if they cry, but the Word of God is full of emotion. It is not robot material. It is not dead in the mind and dead in the heart material. It is something that you read, and because you're alive and it's alive, it touches you. The Word of God is precious. This Holy Bible, Authorized King James Bible, it's full of emotion. And God spoke. Stephen said God spoke. "And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said God. And after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place." So of course it was Egypt. They went down to Egypt and brought Moses brought him out. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begat Isaac, and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. Patriarchs means fathers, the fathers of the tribes. And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. The patriarchs, when you talk about patriarchs, you'd think that they'd be somebody that was real honorable. But at that time, they didn't think of themselves as patriarchs. They thought of themselves as not as beloved as Joseph. He had a coat of many colors, you know, and they didn't. And they wanted to get rid of Joseph. So, moved with envy, they sold Joseph into Egypt. This bud is wonderful, but God was with him. He was. And he delivered him out of all his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. The wonderful story of Joseph in the Bible. We're really going through a lot of the book of Genesis right here. Stephen is taking us through that, and he's speaking to these people that have him up before the council. And now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction. And our fathers found no sustenance. But when Jacob heard that there was corn in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first. And at the second time Joseph was made known to his brethren, and Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him, and all his kindred, 75 souls. So Jacob went down into Egypt, and died, he and our fathers, and were carried over into Sychem, and laid in the sepulchre that Abraham bought for a sum of money of the sons of Immer, the father of Sychem. So this is a very concise summary of the lives of Abraham, Isaac. Really didn't speak too much about Isaac, and Jacob, and the patriarchs, and all of them coming in to Egypt. And so Jacob went down into Egypt and died, he and our fathers, and was carried over into Sychem, and laid in the sepulchre that Abraham bought for the sum of the money of the sons of Immer, the father of Sychem. So Abraham is in that grave. Sarah is in that grave. I'm not sure about Isaac and Rebekah. Perhaps and probably they are. Because Jacob and Leah, and Jacob tells about it. Let's look back here when Jacob dies. We'll have to look in Genesis, excuse me. I have to look in Genesis when he's telling about, way back in the back of Genesis, when Jacob is telling the sons about him being buried, that he wanted to be buried in the land of Canaan. Here we go. Jacob. Here it is. And he's telling them, he said, there they buried Abraham and Sarah's wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. Okay? So Isaac and Rebekah were buried there. And Abraham and Sarah. And he buried Leah. Now he buried Rachel. Rachel was very important. But they were on the way to Bethel. Or the way back, I think. They were on the way back when she died. And she was buried near Bethlehem. Isn't that something? She was. And so she wasn't buried with the rest of them, the fathers. But so we find out that this is just a summary of what happened in the book of Genesis. And then it says, but when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, he told him they weren't going to stay there. They were going to be able to come out from Egypt. The people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. See, Joseph was famous in Egypt, but Joseph was there at the beginning, and they were in Egypt for over 400 years. So there came a king that knew not Joseph. Perhaps he didn't want to honor Joseph because there were so many of the people in Egypt, and they wanted to make slaves out of them. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end they might not live. So here is where they're telling you, take the men children, the boys, and throw them in the river. And the midwives wouldn't kill them, and they would bring them to birth, and then they were expected, the Hebrews themselves were expected to throw them in the river. In which time Moses was fair and was born and was exceeding fair, and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. They hid him. They hid him because he was a good boy. You know, they thought it was a fine child. They didn't want to kill him. So his mama made that ark, and she put him in the river. She obeyed, but she made a way for him to live when he got in the water. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. Now this is one of the greatest things, I think, that God orchestrated. When I talk about, I hadn't ever used that word in Granny Shares before, orchestrated. But I think it means planned and brought to pass and made it fit in with everything else just like it was supposed to. I think that's what the word orchestrated means. And God can do that. He can orchestrate wonderful things happening in your life, in my life, in all of our lives. He can get it so well planned out that it just flows smoothly. And there it is. When Pharaoh's daughter came to take her bath, there was the baby in the basket. He was crying. Check it out. See who it is. See what it is. Oh, it's one of the Hebrews' babies. And Miriam comes up. Want me to get someone to nurse him? Want to get me one of the women to nurse him? Go. Who's she get? Moses' mother. And Pharaoh's daughter, under the authority of Pharaoh's daughter, Moses is raised up until he's weaned by his mother. Isn't that wonderful? Let me just tell you, let's look to God for wonderful things to happen, for Him to orchestrate them, set them to music, put them in the form they ought to be in, let them play out beautifully. Isn't that good? And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. Mighty. Moses meant, I drew him out of the water. That's what his name meant. And they taught him. They taught him the things that he needed to know. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Now this is something Stephen says that I don't know about, that I don't know any of us knew about. And if Stephen's anointed while he's telling them this, he's saying that Moses knew more than he seemed to know when you read it in Genesis. He knew more about what he was going to do, what his life was all about. And when he killed that Egyptian, Stephen said, for he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them. But they understood not. Can you imagine Moses knowing he was a Hebrew, watching all the slaves, and they're Hebrews too, and perhaps thinking on, how could I deliver them? How could I help my people? Thinking on it, and even considering that he might do that sometime. That's what Stephen is pointing to. And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do you wrong one another? But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me, as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? It was known. We got some more to tell about Moses. Stephen does. We're going to let him tell it. But I'm going to stop right there. We're going to get back into it tomorrow. This is interesting, isn't it? The history of the Jews from Stephen's point of view. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow, Lord willing.